in order to do that, one of the things that we do is we offer opportunities for people to gather like this and have conversations around different topics. And so that's what we're here to do today. And again, we're going to hear about 10 tips for funding projects in your community. And I'll tell you a little bit about Ruthie before we get started. So Ruthie lives in Pikeville, Kentucky, or near Pikeville, Kentucky, actually. She's the owner of Vision Granted, which is a consulting business that specializes in project management, grant writing, and bureaucracy navigation. I like that, that terminology. She has degrees in theater and communication, and she's also a certified project management professional through the Project Management Institute. And I can see that in Ruthie, because Ruthie, whenever we need anything done, Ruthie's on it and moving things forward quickly. So she's led dozens of diverse teams in planning, managing, and funding community and economic development projects. She's a board member of her local Main Street program in Pikeville, and she's on the steering committee for What's Next East Kentucky as well. Ruthie and her husband, Tim, have 4 kids, ages 3 to 9. And they also co-own Mr. Tibbs Trading Company, which is a quirky gift company that tells the story of people around the world through their food. And since the pandemic began, Ruthie has helped start up nonprofits and government agencies in Eastern Kentucky apply for more than 24 federal grants that have ranged from $10,000 up to $2.5 million. And she has had an 80% success rate to date with those grants. So welcome, Ruthie, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Donna. I'm really excited to be here today because I love What's Next East Kentucky. I've had so much fun just getting to know everyone. It's funny because I started coming to What's Next East Kentucky for the in-person meeting in Prestonsburg, and then the pandemic hit. So like half the people that I work with all the time, I haven't even met in person, and we just become such good friends. So I encourage you guys, if you want to join What's Next East Kentucky, we'd love to have you. When I first came to Eastern Kentucky, it was about 4 years ago, and my husband was going to go to University of Pikeville, and I stepped out of the car in Pikeville, and I just fell in love with it. It was like stepping back in time. It was like the best place ever, but it wasn't just the place, it was the people. And as I've started doing more of my consulting business with grant writing and helping nonprofits, I have just seen so many good people who are working so hard. Like I've lived all over. I used to live in Hawaii, and this is the best place I've ever been in. And it's because the people work so hard, like everyone. Most of the people who start nonprofits have full-time jobs, and they work full-time for their nonprofit. And so there's just so much need for funding and people to be creative about developing strong projects that can get funded. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation, but I just wanted to start off saying that I just really love the people out here and just the spirit that everyone has for really wanting to do the best with their community and so much with so little. So what I'm hoping happens today is that each of you leave with at least one, if not many, resources that you can take back that will help you develop strong projects that are fundable and also be able to find funding and gain that funding. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'll be sharing some tools and resources as well and a bunch of different links to help with that. So I wanted to start off with talking about what grants really are. Like when I was growing up, I remember seeing this guy on TV all the time, and he was like, free money, free money, free money. And I always thought that's what grants were. And then when I actually got into the grant world about 10 years ago, I found out that is not what grants are. They are not free money. They require a lot of time and energy. You have to manage them, report on the impact. Even after the money ends, you're still reporting half the time. So there's a lot that goes into grants. So if there's any decent, legitimate way that you cannot apply for a grant, I highly suggest you go that route instead. But if you really need a grant, then these tips are going to help you. When I first started working at a university about 8 years ago, there was a very seasoned grant writer who said the hardest part is not getting a grant. The hardest part is spending the money after you get a grant. And I thought that was ridiculous. I was like, if someone gives me $10,000, $1 million, whatever it is, I'm going to spend it. And she said, no, it's because there's so many federal regulations and things like that. For instance, she said she asked for t-shirts in a grant, and then she wasn't allowed to buy them because they had to be called uniforms and not t-shirts. There's just so many strange things. You'll enter this world of grants and be like, what is this? So it's important to be able to navigate that. So that's something that I do. So I'd love to help you navigate those things. But so I'm going to start off with some tips for developing a fundable project, developing your team, starting small, drafting a work plan, developing a strategy, and a concept paper. So I'll go into detail about these first. So when you're developing your team, you want to think about all the pieces that you need that you don't have. So you're one person. So if you're really good at, finances and things like that, that's great. You might need to find someone else who's good at looking at the big picture or looking at all the details. There's lots of different types of personalities that you might need to complete your team. So yes, think about people of other genders, other races, anything that makes you different, but also think about what makes you cognitively different and how can you collect those people to have on your team to make it be successful. A lot of people in the survey before this were saying that they would like some resources about leadership. And so I wanted to share this with you. And after this is done, I've put this presentation on my blog as well as the templates that you can download. So you'll be able to look at this and click on the links and actually find these resources. And I think Donna's going to send that link out after this. But there's a lot of really great resources that can help you develop leadership skills. Appalachian Regional Commission has the Appalachian Nonprofit Resource Center. And so they have lots of resources for financial management, fundraising, program operations, and just leadership development in general. So I highly recommend you look at that. They also have their own Leadership Institute, which is really hard to get in. I've applied like 3 times and keep getting denied. But they only accept 40 throughout the whole Appalachian region. But if you can get into that, that is like a wonderful opportunity. There's also Bright Kentucky. So if you're an emerging leader between the age of 21 and 40, this is an amazing opportunity. They're accepting applications right now, and I think that deadline is next week. So if you want to apply for it, I highly recommend it. Life-changing. It's a 5-month leadership program, all expenses paid except for your travel to get there. Really, really good leadership program. And then there's the Brushy Fork Leadership Institute, and they have the Community Leadership Program and their annual Leadership Summit. So I highly recommend you look into this. And this is something that most people don't really think about very often, so I wanted to bring it to your attention. It's called AmeriCorps. There's so many nonprofits and even government agencies out there that just don't have the feet on the ground to actually help them get things done. And so if you've ever heard of Peace Corps, where people go to other countries and they serve there, AmeriCorps is kind of like that. And so if you need to gain some full-time volunteers to help your organization or your government agency build capacity, look into this. And I have to warn you, AmeriCorps is a grant. So grants take time, they take managing, they take reporting. So it will take some time if you want to do this, but if you need the people, you might want to look into it. So there's a link to AmeriCorps there, and there's also a Kentucky Campus Compact, and they're at Northern Kentucky University, and they can also help you learn more about AmeriCorps and how that might be able to help your organization get some people. All right, priority number 2. So number 2 is start small. So something that I say is start small, then you fail small, and then you can grow tall. But if you start big, then you fail big, and then you don't grow as tall, right? A lot of people want to go all in. They want to get the $1 million grant. They want to have this big project. But first of all, you're probably not going to get the $1 million grant if you haven't started small and shown success. And second of all, if you do get the $1 million grant, how awful would that be to waste $1 million and fail miserably, right? So go ahead and start now. Think about the things that you can start immediately. Focus on the assets you have and what you can do right now. I put these 2 books here because I like reading a lot, and I love these 2 books. They're 2 of my favorite project management books. They have some techniques that seem kind of rigid, but there's a lot you can learn that you don't actually have to apply all the rigid techniques if you just want to apply some of them of what you're doing. Strategic Doing, and then Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. They have some really cool things to help you learn how to start small. So the third thing is draft a work plan. If you're trying to develop a project that's going to be highly fundable, it really helps to develop a work plan. I know some of you, especially creative folks, see this and it probably scares the living daylights out of you. It looks way too organized. I'm sorry, but it really is helpful. So this is something that was inspired by a research coordinator at Texas State University. And she started doing it, and then I started developing questions. So we kind of collaborated on this. And so if you answer these 7 questions before you start your project, a lot of it, you're actually going to be able to copy and paste into a grant proposal and then elaborate on it. So it's really going to help you answer a lot of the common questions in a grant. And then I typically will do this part, which I know is probably even scarier, and then go back to those final wrap-up questions that are things like, imagine your project is over and was not successful. What went wrong? Those are scary questions that you don't want to think about when you're planning a project. But after you plan a project, if you ask those questions, it'll help you identify the things that you could have solved before they even happened. You could have prevented them. So this is just a really helpful template. This is what the middle of it, the meat of it looks like. And I know it's scary, but it's super helpful to fill out. You put your goal first, and then underneath your goal, you put like what you're trying to accomplish, and then a key action step. And then the timeline is really helpful because later when you're writing a grant, a lot of times they ask for a timeline. So this is going to help you plan out when things are going to happen. And then there's required resources. So for instance, if you're going to have to travel somewhere, you need the money for that. Or if you need to buy a certain supply, then that'll go there. Then there's milestones, which half of those might be empty, but it might be something like create a development plan or something like that would go there. And then the person's responsible, who's going to be doing it, and then any comments. So from this, you can write a whole grant application. Like the part that says required resources, that's going to help you do your budget, because then you're going to know, oh, I have to travel. I totally forgot I was going to have to travel. I'm going to need money for that. And that's going to, you're going to be able to put money in for that. So I know it looks scary, but it's super helpful. There's probably other work plans that you can download online. I encourage you to look for those too. That's fine, but this has been super helpful for me, so I wanted to share it with you guys. I love this quote. So Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "In preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." So I know I just showed you that complicated work plan, and you're probably like, oh, that's going to take a lot of work to do. Now I'm going to tell you, it might not actually happen like that. And I know it's disappointing to think about putting in quite a few hours of your time to do this work plan. And then, you know, COVID might happen. Like there's also, who would have thought that would happen? There's all kinds of things that'll probably happen. So you can't be completely strict to your plan all the time. You have to recognize that things might happen, and that's okay. You know, you have to be willing to pivot. But if you haven't thought it through, if you haven't written down the plan, then a lot of times when those unexpected things happen, you don't even know what's going to happen next. So that process of going through the plan is going to help you to pivot whenever crazy things happen so much. So I highly encourage you to do the plan. Okay, number 4. So develop a funding and financing strategy. So a lot of people think of funding and financing being the same thing, but they're really not. So funding a lot of times is things that money that you don't have to pay back. And financing is usually things that you do have to pay it back. And so a lot of times, if you can kind of couple those things together, then you can fund your whole project. So you have to think about both of those things. So some of the templates that I sent to you or that you guys can download are some budget templates. I have a simple one, and I also have a 3-year one that you can download. So I encourage you, once you've thought through your work plan, you got your project all figured out, then think about a dream budget. What would you absolutely love to have that would make this super successful? Make that one. And then think about the bare minimum. What do you have to get a little bit of impact? What do you need? And then for a grant proposal, it's probably going to be kind of a little bit in between those two. So I want to talk to you about making your strategy. So this is called a capital stack. I'm not going to go into too much detail. There's a big group that's making a playbook that's going to talk about this. And when that comes out, I'm going to share that on What's Next East Kentucky's Facebook page. So please join the What's Next East Kentucky Facebook page, and that'll come out. The playbook will be all about how you can stack different types of investments to make really big community projects happen, like tax credits, like grants, like in equity investments, all those types of things. That'll be really helpful when it comes out probably the next few months. But I just wanted to show this to you to get you to think about how there's more than grants, right? Grants are just one level of this capital stack. There's tons of ways that you can get the funding you need to do your project. So I like to think about long-term, how is this going to be sustainable? So you just come up with your work plan, you come up with your budget, right? But then before you even start thinking about raising funds to make that budget happen, think about, well, if I do get this funded, how am I going to sustain it after those grant funds end? Is there a way that I can sell something? Is there a product or service related to this grant that I can sell that could bring in some revenue to keep it going? Is there a particular foundation or sponsor that might go ahead and continue funding it? Is there an annual fundraising event that we could have that would keep it funded? Think about all those things first. And then once you figured out how to make it sustainable, then you can really think about a startup fundraising plan. How are you going to actually fund that whole budget you just came up with? And that can include more than just grants, especially big grants. These sponsors don't usually like to be the first money into a project. They like to see that other people are interested in it too. Other foundations and organizations want to put their money in. And then they're like, oh, if they're interested, I'm interested too. So that makes it really successful whenever you're applying for a grant and you can show that other investors have also invested or other foundations. So yeah, look into alternatives too, like tax credits and loans. Are there other ways that you can get this to work? And so when that playbook comes out, you can see different examples of those. And then also think about how you can start small with planning grants and technical assistance grants. A lot of people don't know that these types of grants exist. They're usually for less than $10,000, and it's to help you think about how to plan your project, maybe bring in a consultant to help you, gain some leadership skills for your board, whatever those things are that your organization or your government agency is. It can help you to get just a little bit of funding to get that started. And then also think about crowdfunding and event fundraisers. So crowdfunding can be complicated sometimes, but there's types of crowdfunding that can be simple. So I wanted to give you an example. This is called the Show of Hands. I love this example. It's from Wheeling, West Virginia, and I think almost any community could do this. So what they do is they have a big meeting, and anybody who comes and wants to vote pays at least $5 as a donation. They have selected 4 different proposals for projects that will benefit the community, and they present those. And then all the attendees who paid at least the $5 can cast a vote for which project they want to fund. And then the organization too has also gotten $3,000 from community partners like banks and things like that, so that the winner of these 4 proposals, by a show of hands, everyone who gets the vote, gets that whole pot of money. So all the donations from the people who came and from the local sponsors. So how cool is that? And they do that like every quarter. So they constantly have new projects going on. And then at every show of hands too, they have the winners from the previous one come back and present what they've done, present the impact that it's had. And so everybody's winning, right? I love that crowdfunding example. So I also wanted to share some ideas for matching funds. There were quite a few people in the survey before this who said they really want ideas for that. So if you're totally new to grants and you never heard of matching, I'll be brief, but basically some grants want you to have a little bit of the funding paid for by someone else. So they don't want to pay for the full cost of the project. They want someone else to pay for part of it, right? So some of that match could be cash, or some of it could be what's called in-kind donations, which are donations that are provided instead of cash. So some ideas for some cash that you could get for match. For instance, the Appalachian Regional Commission, a lot of their grants require at least a 20% match. So that means 20% of the project they want to come from some other place. So this is a really cool announcement from the Foundation Appalachian Kentucky. A couple of weeks ago, they announced the LIFT Fund. This is amazing for Eastern Kentucky because you can apply for $25,000 to $50,000 in matching funds. And they're also going to be offering technical assistance. So that's super cool. There's a link there. You can apply for that. There's also a more national organization called the Just Transition Fund. And they'll also give up to $25,000 in matching funds for federal grants. There's a link to apply there. And these are both rolling applications. Another way to get cash is sometimes local organizations. So a lot of times, like if you have a local bank or if you have a large employer that's local, or they'll give money, especially utility companies are really good at this. A lot of times gas companies, electric companies, they want to invest in their communities that they serve, even telecommunications companies. So maybe contact some of them and see if they're offering any grants or sponsorships. Another way to get some cash for matching funds can sometimes be grants. So this is tricky. You want to make sure you read a grant application and what you're allowed to do, because some grants like USDA, for instance, U.S. Department of Agriculture, they don't like you having federal funds for most of their grants. But for instance, Appalachian Regional Commission sometimes will. You just have to get approved. So one cool thing I found out recently about Appalachian Regional Commission is that AmeriCorps Vista, so the AmeriCorps program I was talking about, they'll actually count that as match. Also abandoned mine land grants. If you've gotten one of those, they can count that as match too. So that can sometimes be very helpful. You just have to show that it's already been awarded. Okay, so let's move on to in kind. So these are donations provided instead of cash. You have to get creative with these sometimes. And so, for instance, if you're going to be doing a bunch of meetings in a certain space, and usually that space, like let's say it's a university, usually they would charge a certain amount to lease that space, then you can use that as match. You just have to get a letter from that university showing that that's how much they usually charge and that you're going to be using it for this. Same thing with rental equipment, other services. Maybe you know an accountant who's willing to offer their services for free. That's fantastic. That means that you can actually use their normal advertised price for accounting per hour as match for your organization. So one cool thing too that I think a lot of people don't realize is that there's actually a value for volunteers. So you can collect the time of volunteers for your organization working on a particular grant, and you can calculate how many hours times the national hourly rate that is equal to. And so this value of volunteer time is published by the independent sector, and they actually just updated. It's even higher than it's ever been. They updated it just a couple weeks ago. It's now $29.95 an hour. So if you have volunteers, you can multiply all their hours by $29.95 an hour, or maybe even more if they are, for instance, like an accountant or someone with a special skill that they usually get paid more than that per hour. So don't let that pass you by. Make sure to use that. Those are great things to use. One thing I wanted to mention though is you have to track the matching funds. And so especially for federal agencies, that can get tricky sometimes. So if you're going to show something as match, make sure you have a way to track it. And so that can be through timesheets or Zoom printouts of people who participated. There's lots of ways to track it. Just make sure that you figure that out first. All right, number 5. So I highly encourage people to draft a brief concept paper of their project. So there's lots of reasons to do this. Here's an example. It's just one page. There's a brief summary. There's who's on the team, the need for it, a description of the project, and then impact and future goals. And I have a template for how to make a concept paper that you can download as well. And this is just something that I found has been super helpful. You can change it around however you want. It's not like concrete. You have to have these things included. Maybe you don't need to have the team in there yet because you don't have the team yet. You're trying to get partners. But this has been super helpful to help a lot of the nonprofits that I work with get funding. So this is really helpful too because it's just a really good use of your time. So you could spend months working on a grant and get denied, but if you had just sent a concept paper first and asked the program manager if this was a good fit, they would have told you a lot of things that would have changed your application. So really it helps you find out if it's a good fit with the sponsor and their priorities. And then if there's anything that can be changed, you can get feedback on the strengths and weaknesses of your project. Another great thing for you to use it for is to get new partners. So if you don't have your team complete yet, or there's new partners that you need, you can send this little one-pager to someone and say, this is what we're working on. Do you want to join it? Does it sound good to you? So it's a great way to build relationships. So here's an example. I got permission from Texas State University. This is one of the first ones I ever did. And from this, we sent this for the Texas State Black and Latino Playwrights Conference to the National Endowment for the Arts. And they loved it. They gave us some feedback, and they ended up getting a $50,000 grant because we sent this first and were able to get the feedback for it. So this has been hugely successful for tons of grants I've worked on. I just want to recommend that you keep it brief. Think about a resume. Some people give like 10-page resumes, but the employer only looks at the first page, right? And so don't waste your time. Make sure you have a lot of the really important information on the first page. And then if you can add graphics, awesome. Yes, please. People love graphics, so add that on as well. And then just like a resume, make sure you tailor it. Never send it the exact same one to every single partner you're trying to recruit or every single sponsor. And then just make sure to keep it simple. All right, the next part is finding funding. So I'm going to give a bunch of links to help you guys find funding. First, I'll start with the free ones. So you guys can leave here today and sign up for these things, and you've already got some funding sources. That's great. So the first is the Rural List e-newsletter, and it's a monthly newsletter with different opportunities for rural areas. I love this one. Then there's the Philanthropy News Digest. So you can click that link and you can sign up for the Foundation Center's regular emails, and they call them RFPs, which is like a request proposal. But basically you can sign up, you can check all the things you're interested in. So there's like 100 different things, aging, agriculture, whatever, entrepreneurship. Check the things you're interested in, and then you'll get this nice tidy little grant thing in your inbox. I think it's every 2, 3, or 4 weeks, showing you all the things for those topics. It's great. The next thing is grants.gov. So they have a federal grant listing. I'm not a big fan of grants.gov, but it's like a necessary evil. So, you can find federal grants that way. They have to put their federal grants there. So you can go in there and look through all their grants for specific topics. And the next is the Kentucky Department of Local Government. So highly recommend you click on that. There's lots of different grants, especially if you're a local government agency, that you can find there. And then here's some paid services. So my 2 favorites are Kentucky Grant Watch, which it's $200 annually. So I know that's pretty tough for a lot of folks, but one nice thing is that you can actually just get an $18 a week one. So as long as you go in and make sure that you've taken it off so that they don't keep charging every week $18, then you can just pay that, once every 3 months or a year or so, just to go in, pay $18 and look at all their grants and see what they got. The next one is the Foundation Center online directory. So this is kind of a different animal. The Kentucky Grant Watch has specific grants, and the Foundation Center is usually more of a way where you can actually go in and you have to be kind of a nerd to really like this, which I love it, but you can go in and you can look at potential sponsors. You can look at foundations and corporations, and you can see how much money they've given for certain topics. You can search by topic, and you can even see their tax records. So if you're a super nerd like me, then you can go in every year and look at how much they've given to certain organizations for what type of project. And then you can see yourself in some of those and see if you can be a good fit. So that's a really good one. Here's some other paid subscription services. I haven't had the best luck with all of them, but they might work great for you. So I wanted to make sure you're aware of them. If you're a researcher, then Pivot is excellent for university research funding. There's Grantscape and GrantStation. They're kind of expensive, but if you can find something, that's great. The next thing I wanted to tell you about is TechSoup. So if you're a nonprofit, this is a really helpful link. You can go there and they can get you discounts on technology, Google, Microsoft, even like actual laptops and things like that. So it's a great resource to have. And they usually have discounts on GrantStation for that as well. So I wanted to highlight that. Here's some links to some upcoming small grants. So the Mountain Association has their business support. I think the deadline just ended, but it's kind of rolling. So there'll probably be another opening in the fall for more of those if you need technical assistance. And so that can help, help your organization gain consultants to do things that you need, like grant writing, leadership development, sustainability, things like that. The next is a Just Transition Fund. I mentioned that earlier. They can provide technical assistance, and they can also provide those matching funds to $25,000, and that's rolling. So there's a link there. The next is the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition. These are usually small grants of $3,500 to $12,000, and that should be coming open pretty soon. I don't have a link to their grant right now because it's not open yet, but I have the one from last year. And then the Appalachian Community Fund. They usually give grants up to $3,000 for grassroots organizations tackling problems related to poverty. So that's a good one to have too.
Hey, Ruthie?
Yeah.
Hey, it's Betsy with Mountain Association. Just to be clear, that the technical assistance is not actually a grant. You can apply for assistance, and if you are approved, we actually contract with and pay for the consultant. So it's not actually a grant that you have to apply for and receive.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. That's good.
Yeah, my boss gets nervous when we start talking about Mountain Association giving grants.
Okay. So it's technical assistance and consulting.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. The next one, here's some large grants, and there's so many large grants that can help Eastern Kentucky. I mean, it would have taken me, hundreds. I would have had to have hundreds of slides. So I just highlighted a few. And if you go to those links that I shared earlier, you'll be able to find a lot more. But there's the Abandoned Mineland Grant. That one was just due in April. The ARC Power Grant, which is about to be due. There's Recreational Trails Program grants that can help with creating trail systems. There's a Land and Water Conservation Program that can help with natural resources, helping to beautify places and make it places where people want to be. And then there's the Community Development Block Grants that can help with economic development and things like that. So there's lots of opportunity out here in Eastern Kentucky. So now you know where to find grants, got all those links. Let's talk about how to craft a competitive proposal. We are so lucky, just in the past couple of years, there's been a lot of resources developed to help with this. So here's one I want to highlight. Kentucky League of Cities has a great step-by-step guide for grant writing. It probably would have taken me a whole day to go into everything about grant writing. We've only got 30 minutes, so you can look there. They've got a really good guide. And also, just a couple of weeks ago, SOAR came out with the Grants 101 playbook for Eastern Kentucky. And I really like this. There's a lot of really helpful resources. There's one that it looks like Sandra Donahue helped develop. She's amazing. She knows so much about grants in Eastern Kentucky, and she helped develop this. But it kind of shows you like a template for how to look at a grant and see if it's a good fit for your organization. And I think it's a really helpful resource. You can download that, and there's a link to download that. So you guys have tons of resources to help you. Now let's say you're ready to apply. I wanted to hear from you guys. What do you think are the 2 things that you should do? Anyone want to tell me what's next? You're ready to apply? Nervous? All right, well, I'll go ahead and tell you. Number 1, read the instructions. Everyone thinks they know that, but then they don't do it. So read the instructions. And the second thing you do is a trick question. It's read the instructions again. This is one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're applying for grants, is they just don't read it. They think, oh, I'll just answer the questions and done. And there's almost always something that you've missed. Some grants will have a special format that you have to have. And so if you didn't use 12-point Times New Roman font with 1-inch margins or whatever that is, they automatically toss it out. So just make sure you read those instructions, highlight it, read it again, make sure you're following it. Because why in the world would a sponsor want to give you a bunch of money if they don't even think that you're willing to read their instructions? So that's super helpful. The next thing is, if you're allowed to, talk with the sponsor, especially in Eastern Kentucky. I've seen a lot of the sponsors out here really appreciate that. Some of the national funders will actually kick you out of the process if you do it. I mean, that's like 0.001%. So make sure you read the instructions first and they don't like disallow you from doing that. But if they do allow it, I highly recommend you call them. Usually there's some sort of contact person that you can contact. Here's some potential questions that you can ask and things to help you get ready for it. Email them, ask if there's a good time to talk, see if the grant that you're applying for is in line with your project. Send them that concept paper, have them read over it first and then talk to you. It's a great way to start a relationship. And then make sure you follow up with a personal thank you note. So the next thing is that you want to convince your reviewers. And I know that sounds very obvious, but the best thing that I found is that you want to show them, not tell them. And so like, here's an example. So we help increase economic development. Here, let me do this. We help increase economic development because we have the knowledge and experience to do it. We host big events that bring in lots of people. In turn, our events bring in more revenue for local businesses. Those are all probably true things about that organization, but it didn't paint a picture. It didn't help you understand what they're actually doing, right? So the next one is saying the same thing, but it's painting a picture. It's showing them, not just telling them they're good at it. Based on estimates from increased tax revenue collected by local counties, last year, our organization held events that spurred $3.2 million in economic impact in 2 counties. And this grant will provide the startup funds necessary to host 10 more events that will spur an estimated $8.9 million in economic impact across 5 counties. Downtown shop owner Timmy Tackett said, we nearly closed due to COVID, but the new customers we gained during these events saved our business. This grant will expand our reach to serve 3 new counties and help more businesses. So see how it had this, like, there was data to back everything up, and then it had a story about it, kind of confirming it. That does so much more to show your reviewers what you're doing than just telling them that you're good at something. So this is a secret sauce pro tip that has really helped me. I learned this from the Foundation Center boot camp in San Francisco a few years ago. A foundation said this. They said statistics raise eyebrows, stories raise dollars. And so to be competitive, first you can share data and it gets people interested. And then you share a story and it helps them realize the impact that it's really having. So statistics raise eyebrows, stories raise dollars. I highly encourage you, use that in your grant applications, use it in any kind of proposal you're doing. Another secret sauce pro tip that has really helped me, this book. I love this book. Another grant writer from Connecticut told me to read this. It's changed my life. This has helped me to learn how to communicate things, not just in grant writing, but in life, that helps people remember it. So read this book. I love these authors. It's Chip Heath and Dan Heath, they're brothers. But they have this success principle method. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I highly encourage you to read the book, but it's keeping things simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, use emotions and stories. One example they give is, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a pomelo before, a pomelo. I was reading this book and I actually knew what one was, but it went into this long paragraph, that was like, well, a pomelo is a citrus fruit with a pink flesh and a 1-inch thick like rind. And it just went on and on and on for like a whole paragraph. And then by the end of the paragraph, I had no idea what they were talking about, even though they were being very specific. And then the next example said, a pomelo is it like a really sweet grapefruit with a thick rind? Which one helps you understand it better, you know? So I think sometimes we know too much about the things that we love. We know too much about our project. And so we make them way more complicated than they need to be. And sometimes just keeping things simple really helps. So that's just one example. I love that book. Read Made to Stick. It's awesome. Number 10. This is a huge issue. A lot of people wait until the last minute. No, you got to submit early. Try not to procrastinate. Try to submit at least 2 days before the deadline, because there's probably going to be issues. There's so many grants have like their own magical portal you have to use to submit, or even grants.gov. Grants.gov can only handle so many applications at one time. And so if you don't submit early, you're too late. Some of them even say you have to submit by 4:59 p.m. Eastern time. And if you're at 5:01, it's too late. I had some friends who spent months working on a really big $5 million grant out in Hawaii, and they were 2 minutes late. Even though they submitted it 30 minutes early, it just wasn't going through. And so they were 2 minutes late and they didn't accept it. And so they had a big epic fail party with a cake that said epic fail. And it was just the saddest thing ever. So don't let that happen to you. Try to submit early and pay attention to those deadlines of like 5 p.m., 4:59, whatever it is. The next is, if you're denied, then learn from what happened and then try again. I mean, a lot of these grants out here are super competitive with just like 2% of applicants being funded. And you might also just have not been aware of one of the priorities they had because they didn't even tell you about it. And so they're prioritizing another project, even though yours really should have won because you had like a really strong application. Don't feel defeated. I mean, no, it's really sad you spent a long time on it, but what I highly recommend you do is ask for their reviewer comments, maybe not immediately after, maybe a few weeks after. Talk to that program sponsor again, ask them if they'll send you some comments to make it better. And a lot of times that will help you build a relationship with that sponsor and make them want to fund you more in the future. So keep in touch with that sponsor, invite them to your special events, send them success stories about the impact you are having for what you're doing, and keep asking them questions and stay on their radar. I've had a few clients who were denied the first time, and the second time they applied, they followed this and they got it. So, hang in there, you can do it. So here's some helpful templates and resources. I kind of went over these already, but these are ones that you can download from that link that Donna's going to send out. There's the work plan, and the concept paper kind of describes how to write one, why it's important. And then there's a template for a 3-year budget and just a simple one as well. And then here's some resources you can click on. There's nonprofit resources from that Foundation Center Candid place. There's for federal grants, there's tips from grants.gov that are actually pretty good tips for you to click on. There's the Appalachian Nonprofit Resource Center that we mentioned earlier, Kentucky Nonprofit Network. One of you guys actually in the survey, asked for more ways other than grant writing to help your nonprofit raise money. And I'm sorry I didn't have time to go into that, but I really like this link. The 11th is actually write grants, but the first 10 are simple ways that are not grant related that can help your nonprofit raise money. So look at that. And then there's some really helpful data. If you're writing a grant, data is always a great thing to have to support what you're doing. So these are some really helpful places to find data. All right, so that is all. I'd love to hear any of your questions that you might have for me. I know that was like a fire hose. Sorry, there was like thousands of resources I was trying to fit into something so you can each go down your own little rabbit hole and find the things that you're interested in.
Could I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
My observation is that, and I think you got to be careful about it, quite honestly, is that all the fund sources, most all the fund sources have an agenda. And we write applications to sort of cater to that agenda. And sometimes that agenda is not one that we have. It's not one that we should be doing within our community. So just because they're out there giving money doesn't mean that you should apply for that money, because it doesn't match up all the time. And so here you are with money that you have to spend, but it's really not what you want to do. You're doing it because, oh, I got some free money. You're not doing it because it's helping my community.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's one of the first things I usually talk about in my grant writing workshop that I give, is just that so many people and organizations, they see a grant is open and they just go for the money. They just make a project up so they can bring in the money. And that's really not how you can be successful in your own community. So I always encourage people to start with developing a really good project, something that's really going to help you, and the money will come. It might not even be through a grant. If you have a really good project and you started small and show little successes, you can get, a local bank or or a local donor who might help you a little bit. And once they see the impact of that, it can grow and it can get bigger, and eventually you'll be able to get grant funding. So thank you for mentioning that.
And I have a particular bias, because I happen to believe that many of the federal funds are developed without knowledge of the area, and that we're unique, just as everyone's unique, but the solutions that they may have are not solutions that are workable or useful for us. So
very good point. Yeah, I feel like we just have to get more creative about our solutions, and that's why I encourage people not to apply for grants if they can find any other way to fund it. Because if we can just start small and get things going and get enough people involved, then we can solve any of the challenges that our own communities have.
I have one more bias too, and since no one else is talking, I'm going to take the floor, right? I have a particular bias when I go to meetings and everybody says, let's do a grant. Well, my bias is you're not doing a grant, you're doing an application for a grant. So be specific, please. Don't say, let's go get a grant. Let's do an application. That's my own little bugaboo.
Thank you, David. Are there any other questions or comments?
I do think,
Donna, since no one else is talking, I'm gonna, I'm an introverted. If within this group, if we were all in the same room, I'd be very quiet, I suspect. But on Zoom, you can be whoever you want to be, right? And like Ruthie, my background is theater, so it's all theater. Ruthie, I know it's not a PR for you, but what is your phone number and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I can share my screen again and it can show that.
Is it in the materials that are going to be going out, Ruthie?
It's going to take you to my website, and yeah, you can contact me through there too.
Yeah, so we can make sure we can send these slides with the materials that we send out, so that folks will have that. Yeah.
Thanks, Donna.
Yeah, and I just want to give a little plug that starting in I think it's going to launch in June. Donna, correct me if I'm wrong. Mountain Association has some money from the EDA, Economic Development Association, to fund a nonprofit learning community or coalition. And we're partnering with Brushy Fork and the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky and Judy Sizemore, who's a nonprofit consultant. And so we're going to be offering a number of, gatherings for folks to come together who are in the nonprofit world to just ask questions about grants and doing that sort of thing. We're going to do some workshops online and in person around different parts of fundraising and grant writing. There's going to be other opportunities to help nonprofits kind of assess where they are and grow, and that's going to be free for everybody in Eastern Kentucky. So there will be more information coming out about that.
Yep.
And we're partnering with What's Next East Kentucky to offer some of these workshops and stuff through What's Next East Kentucky.
Yeah. And it really is, I think, going to be designed to be a peer learning community, so that because there's a lot of wisdom out here of a lot of people that have done so many things. And so it's about, sharing out knowledge that is within the organizations like Mountain Association and Brushy Fork, but also about having people share with each other about your own knowledge and lessons and things. Are there other questions for Ruthie about the presentation that she just gave?
I don't have a question, but Ruthie, I think you covered a lot of great materials, and thank you for sharing your resources. It's really helpful.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm glad it helped.
Are there any trends you're seeing right now? Because I know, and it's still pretty true, but there for a while, it just seemed like all the grants wanted. There was a high focus on collaboration, but it was like multi-community, multi-region collaboration is what a lot of grants were looking for. Are there any trends kind of in that vein that anybody really is seeing right now, or that you're seeing right now, Ruthie?
Yeah, definitely. I think collaboration, industry-led. So like if you can involve small businesses as well. Let's see, agriculture, high-tech ag in Kentucky. Tourism is really, really being trending right now. Equity and diversity, and addiction recovery. I think those are the main things that are trending.
Yeah, I think especially within private philanthropy, a lot of them are really insisting, that if the organizations they're going to fund are going to be organizations that are really working to be inclusive, to include, people of color, underrepresented groups, people with disabilities. So I think that's good incentive for your organization to be thinking about how you're doing it. It's not enough to just say, oh yeah, we'll serve anybody. They really want to see that you have a strategy for including people and increasing diversity.
That's a really good point. I think it's inclusiveness as well as just community involvement has been really trending. If it's just a few people who've come up with an idea and want to move forward with it, it's harder to sell. But when you show that a whole community is behind it and interested, it's more likely to get funded. And it's just better because more people are going to actually use it too and be part of it. Anything else?
Question. You can be involved in different groups, organizations that has great ideas, but you need, so the question I guess would be, how would you develop your library of information, say, so that you know what direction to go in if you're looking for grant opportunities in one direction or the other? Say you have a community that's, that's got a lot of ideas, but you need to be able to put that together and have a library of information that you can go to. How could you compile something like that?
Honestly, download the presentation I just gave and click on the links that apply to you. I think that's got a really good library right there. And then also Brushy Fork is working on their Leadership Institute thing. I'm sorry, you can talk about that, Donna. And then what Betsy was talking about as well. I think just connecting with other organizations and these new programs that are happening would be really helpful.
And it looked like David maybe had a comment too, or thought, oh, and Claudia. So let's do David and then Claudia.
Yeah, way back when I started, I had a mentor, and I asked him, how do I learn this? And he said, just do it. But my other comment that applies as simply as this is, I honestly like all the online aids and the books that tell you how to do this. The reality is you got to talk to people. You got to, I was thinking here, some of the projects are straightforward and you usually write them down. Some projects don't fit, and the ones that I've seen that are most successful and the ones that are probably the most unique and successful are the ones that you go schmooze. You just go talking to people, you have to sell it to them. And you don't do it on a piece of paper, quite honestly, or at least that's never been my experience but I've been more on the public side of funding as opposed to the private side. But my experience, one that Samantha may know about, is I was involved in the funding of the Mountain Arts Center. And we shopped that one for 2 or 3 years, just sitting down at people, talking to people at the table. I was telling them what it was. And then one more recently is in Syersville, we got Hal Rogers we got included in the omnibus budget bill for about $1.3 million. And that was simply because we were able to get Hal to show up in Syersville, and we gave him a hamburger and gave him a good show. So at least on the public side, you just, I really hate to say it, but you can't read how you do it. You just do it. Mm-hmm. And you talk to people, and Mountain Association is a good resource. But anyway, that's what I have to tell you.
Mm-hmm. And then Claudia, did you have something?
Yes, this is actually specific. If you are doing a grant application and it does not ask for letters of support from community members, they ask for letters of support from specific partners that are going to be helping you, but not from community members. Would you recommend that you include those, or is that just wasting your time?
I would definitely recommend talking to that individual sponsor, talking to the program manager, and ask them what they prefer, because there's probably a reason if they specifically say they don't want it. A lot of times, if they'll allow you to, I'll create just a pretty little thing at the end of a attachment, if they let me, that just has screenshots of things that people have said on Facebook or something like that, that kind of encompasses a lot of the community feelings. And that way they just have to look at one thing instead of read through 20 letters. Because if they've already had to read through 5 to 10 other letters, they're not going to read through 20 random letters from community members. And also just make sure that those letters are high impact. Don't just put it in there because someone said this is a great program. Make sure that it tells a story or says something that really makes you think, wow, make sure that there's a purpose for it. So talk to the sponsor first, make sure it's okay, and then make sure there's a really good reason to put it in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So normally in the community connections gatherings, we